Michael Bell with you again with the CVB Challenge, the Christ Verse per Book Challenge, where we're looking at a Christ verse, a Messianic verse in each of the 66 books of the Bible that proves that Jesus is the center of each of those books and therefore the center of the entire Bible. We've reached a very challenging book, the book of Esther, and I want to highlight Esther chapter 9, verse 1. On the very day that the enemies of the Jews hoped to gain the mastery over them, the reverse occurred. Now, Esther is a very moving, dramatic, elegant narrative. But it doesn't mention the name of God, let alone the name of the Messiah. And so, as interpreters of the Bible, we're really challenged to see Christ on every page here. But the truth is, though it's not a parable or exactly an allegory, it appears to preserve very strong messianic themes. And I want to highlight this by focusing on the main characters of the story. The first main character is Esther. The book of Esther is named after her. She's an unknown Jewish girl, but she's of great beauty. And there's a beauty contest, and she wins. And she eventually becomes the king of the emperor himself, Ahasuerus. Now, through a series of circumstances, great bravery is demanded of her. And she has to boldly approach the king when Haman, who is the great adversary in this book, plots to destroy all the Jews in the kingdom. He wants a day when people are free to slaughter Jews at their discretion. And King Ahasuerus has a Jew as a wife, a Jewess, and he doesn't know it. And so through a series of circumstances, she very bravely and with lots of faith approaches herself at the peril of her own life and saves not only her own life, but the lives of all her people. And in fact, the people avenged themselves upon their enemies. The reverse occurred. Those who wanted to kill Jews, many of them ended up being killed. Those who wanted to rob the Jews of their possessions had their possessions taken. And so Esther, though she's not a messianic figure, she's a figure who represents the people of God. And we see, as we study the scriptures, and particularly the end times, that Satan and his forces of evil are persecuting Christians. And that Esther embodies those people, that persecuted people, and the faith and the bravery that are required. As we study, for example, Revelation chapter 12, chapter 13, and so on, we see that Antichrist will rise and he will try to extinguish all of Christians, all of Christianity from the face of the earth, killing every last Christian if at all possible. And he'll be given this authority for 3.5 years or 42 months or 1,260 days. We call this the Great Tribulation. And even before that, we see the persecution of Christians throughout the world. She's beautiful because she represents the bride of Christ. And she's full of faith and she's full of bravery because this is what's to be required of the bride of Christ. We live in a hostile world that hates us, that wants to put us to death, that wants to deprive us of every good thing. Esther represents the bride of Christ. Now, I believe Mordecai is someone else we should look at. Mordecai is actually Esther's uncle, but he raises her as his own daughter. He's adopted her into his family. Mordecai reminds us of a man named Joseph from the Old Testament, of a man named Daniel of the same time period during the exile. Because both of these men were greatly persecuted, just as Mordecai was by Haman, but were very, very righteous, and eventually in the end are recognized for their bravery, for their righteousness, and elevated to the second position in the entire kingdom. This happened to Joseph. He was the number 1, 2 in the land of Egypt, serving at the right hand of Pharaoh, happened to Daniel. He rose from being a humble slave, well, as Joseph had, humble slave in Nebuchadnezzar's court. And he eventually, through his wisdom and his prudence and through his righteousness, he proves himself to be of unparalleled worth. And he's promoted all the way to the rank of second in Nebuchadnezzar's day. And we see this is happening with Mordecai because he revealed the plot of the assassination plot against Ahasuerus. And because he's a man of integrity and so on and so forth, it eventually comes out that this man is of great worth and he's promoted to the number 2 spot. Now, I believe this represents Christ because Christ too is in the second position in the universe and beyond the universe because he submits only to God the Father. If we have God the Father as that emperor who sits on the throne, well, who's at his right hand? Jesus Christ, the number 2, if you will, in the kingdom. Now, I'm not implying that Jesus isn't God or that he's not as eternal as God the Father, but Jesus said over and over again, I submit to my Father. And Paul even teaches that at the end of times, once the enemies of Christ have been defeated and have been made into Jesus' footstool, he's going to hand everything over to his Father. And even in eternity, he will submit to his Father. Jesus is the number 2 in eternity because the Father is number 1. Lastly, I want to look at Haman. The great irony of Haman is that he hates Mordecai, and he actually hates Esther and the people that Mordecai and Esther belong to because he's filled with a diabolical envy and a blind hatred towards them. And in his quest to put Mordecai in his place, he's come up with this tremendous plan and has even built a gallows to hang Mordecai. And of course, the irony is that Haman himself is hanged on those gallows. The Bible teaches that the wicked are caught in their own plot. It's interesting, Satan thinks he's defeated Christ at the cross. And he says, look, I killed the Messiah. It's over. His kingdom won't happen. I'm victorious. And then 3 days later, he realizes he's made the biggest mistake of his life because he's slain the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. And he set the stage for the glorious resurrection and for the founding of the very kingdom he wants to prevent. And Haman thinks he's got the Jews. He's got Mordecai by the throat. There's no way he's going to escape. But on the day of Purim, the very reverse occurred. It was a day of deliverance for God's people, not a day of doom. Now, if Jesus is on every page of the Bible, shouldn't he be on every page of your life and mine?